Hey, Jamie.
Hi.
It's so good to see your face.
I know. This is actually like hanging out with a friend, which I
I
haven't done in a
know.
really long time.
I mean, we talk a lot, but we don't always see each other's faces.
It's true. It's true. Although you're good at Zoom, you're good at like getting people together.
Well, I've been trying, although I will admit that I am experiencing a little Zoom fatigue at the moment.
I bet you are. You are
It's
in the thick of
just
it.
I just want to be with people,
Mhm.
and there's just I don't know, there's something not the same about Zoom. I'm also just tired of looking at my own face talking back when I'm
Mhm.
talking to people.
That's the worst part.
It is, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just like, oh, there I am. There's me. There's my face.
And the
I don't
whole
want to
like,
look.
is that what I look like?
Totally. I'm like, wow, I really need to do my roots and
I, yeah. Yep.
anyway. And I'm also just um, just tired of not being able to hug my friends. I know you're not a huge hugger, but I would hug you.
I would hug you too. That's how
You know.
bad it is. I mean, it is desperate times. Never have I felt more like I hate people. Never have I hated people more and also missed them. Like I
Yes,
want to be around people, but then I get on the internet and I'm like, I hate everyone.
totally.
So
I
it's a
know.
confusing
It
time.
is a confusing time. That's it. Okay, so for people who are not familiar with you, it's really funny because last night this somehow came up. One of my kids was like, "What's a missionary?" And I was like, "I've
First question, why do you ask? Because
clearly not."
context.
Yeah, and I've clearly not sent you to enough church camp where you've been asked to go up, and commit to being a missionary.
Uh-huh.
But it was just such a funny question, and I was trying to explain it, and I was like, well, our friend Tara was a missionary where she was a midwife, and then I said my friend Jamie, her, and they've met you, I'm like, well, her blog was called The Worst Missionary, and they were like, well, why was she the worst?
Let me count the ways.
And I was like, well, it was more that, and I was trying to explain the nuances, but nonetheless, you have written a blog called The Very Worst Missionary that was, I mean, one of the first blogs I started reading.
Right. It was ages ago. It was back in the like golden era of actual blogging when people had their little online spaces. That's how I met
Oh, for
you,
sure. Yeah,
was
that's
through your
totally
blog.
that's how we
Yep.
met. That's how so many of us met. I mean, this was
Hmm.
before Facebook. Like blogging was kind of our
Hmm.
social media.
Yeah, for sure. I was
And it
definitely.
is. It's
Hmm.
it's how so many of us met. And I just remember being like, "Oh my gosh, she's like so sarcastic and she's thinking through so many of these same things I'm thinking through about like faith and missions
Yes.
and social
And in
justice."
the thick of it. I mean, I
Yeah, you
became a
were.
missionary and then I was like, I have questions.
Yeah.
Like it was not, it was, could have chosen a different path, but that is how it happened. And so I did
Yeah.
find myself living in Costa Rica under this weird title, missionary, that nobody even knows what it means,
Yeah.
and writing about it. And it was just like, what have I done?
Totally. Totally. All right. I want to hear a little excerpt from your book, The Very Worst Missionary. And then I will read a little from mine and then we'll chat.
Okay. This is super embarrassing. I don't know. I, I'm not I'm not a fan of my own work.
Oh, I,
Like
I am not either. I
I,
mean, I'm not a fan of my own work. Like, I
right.
had to read my whole audiobook, and by the end, I was like, wow, I just wrote the worst book ever.
I hear you. I hear that so hard. I feel it. And like when we talked about doing this, and you're like, just pick an excerpt from your book, and I'm like, I don't know what my book says. I cannot be expected to know what those words are. I wrote it, it was published, and then I forgot about it. Like I never want to think about it again. So I had to like skim it. I don't know, and then reading
Yes.
out. I don't know all of
We're
this.
both
So
self conscious writers.
I
I don't know.
apologize in
Yeah.
advance for this. So, a little context. This is in a chapter in which I talk about how I just arrived in Costa Rica, and my first year there was spent in a Spanish language school with about 100 other brand new wannabe missionaries. So, it's people just like me who have shown up in this foreign country to learn a foreign language to then minister to the people.
Yes.
And and my initial impression of the other people was like, what the hell? Like, what have I done? Like, who are these people?
Yeah.
How are we all here?
Yeah.
Um, and And how is this going to play out? And just those questions of like, oh my gosh. So, okay. During our time at language school, we traded stories about how we'd become missionaries. Reports ranged from, I lost my job and didn't have any good prospects, so God called me to the mission field, to, I was on a luxury cruise that stopped at a gorgeous port city in Central America, and I loved it so much God laid it on my heart to move there. We met people who'd been dreaming of missionary life since the time they were 12 years old, and experienced the thrill of handing out sack lunches to inner city homeless on a church field trip. We met others who'd never considered missions until 4 months ago when, while watching a Nat Geo documentary on History Channel, they discovered a passion for barefoot llama herders in the mountains of Peru. Our group contained hipsters and grandmas, pastors and plumbers, CEOs and college kids, cops and stay-at-home moms, and we were all there because, essentially, we felt like it. At some point, in one way or another, we had each concluded that we'd been called by God, and so apparently we were. But was that enough? Would God's calling and a year of language school make an electrician capable of running an orphanage? Prepare a high school teacher to plant a church or a youth pastor to start a business in a new place and culture? Was it enough to turn people like me into, I don't know, a functional adult? I know this sounds mean, but looking around at the crowd I was running with, I began to have serious doubts. I do believe that God can use anyone to do anything. That I am writing this book is a prime example. But I was beginning to see how that is a pretty weak standard by which to choose whom we send out into the world to be the hands and feet of Jesus, or whatever you want to call it. This isn't about having unrealistic expectations of ordinary people, and it's not about negating God's ability to surprise us by doing amazing things. It's about recognizing that we have a responsibility as the church to choose whom we send so that we send the right people to do the right things in the right places, and to not send them when it's not right.
I love that passage. So when you said you were going to read that, I decided to read something that I think piggybacks onto this whole idea of calling. And, you know, it's funny because I think you and I both share a little bit of cynicism about everything in general. Everything. Mm-hmm. But I do think we need to bring some cynicism to our faith practices. And I want to say, you know, I think both you and I still believe that there is such a thing as a calling. And I think you and I both believe that there is such a thing as a need for social justice, mission work when it's done well. But maybe we need to be questioning all of it. So, okay. This is a part in Rage Against the Minivan where I talk about the fact that my husband at the time, we were both divorced, which we can talk about also. Yeah, divorce love, high five. But I talk about how at the time we were married, he was working at a church and he was not fired. Okay. My friendships were shifting, and shortly after Kembe came home, we were adjusting to life with 4 kids, and my husband was released from his position at church. If you are not familiar with the inner workings of Christians, very rarely is someone fired. We use Christian speak like released, or blessed into a new ministry, or called out to a new vocation, because it sounds better, and because we don't want to be responsible for actions that could reflect poorly on us. This kind of code speak is rife in Christian circles, and it can range from annoying to downright toxic. Christians can rely on God speak to distance themselves from personal responsibility or owning their own decisions, and they can also use it to avoid vulnerability. You can blame anything on a prompting from God, from skipping out on a commitment to breaking up with someone. God's will can become a cover for all manner of bad behavior, from little slights and rejections to outright evil. This is accepted in Christian circles, whether it's simply passive-aggressive or veering into spiritual abuse, because we've all been trained that we cannot question God. When we present as if all of our actions and decisions are the responsibility of an omnipotent God, as if our will had nothing to do with it, we disallow the people we love to have feelings or concerns about what we are doing. It's lacking in empathy when we do something that can be hurtful or disappointing to another person and then point to God and shrug, as if we can't help it and we can't own it. But we need to be able to question human decisions, and we need to be able to call on each other to be more direct, more honest, and more accountable with the words we use, because they matter.
Mm-hmm. Yup. The words we use matter.
So, how do we differentiate then between, and how do we take care, in our conversations to make sure that, we can acknowledge when we feel like we have, had an experience where we feel like God's shining a light on something or leading us to something, versus doing the whole like, well, God called me, so I'm not going to still be a part of this group, or I'm going to, bug out on a commitment.
Yes, God called me, and I'm a 19-year-old girl, so I'm going to start an orphanage in
Right.
Rwanda or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah.
I just think that that it's such a cop out to say, God, I felt called, or I was called. Like that is such a cop out, and there are still parameters.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to be a dick. I don't know if you swear on this or not, but
Yeah, it's fine.
okay, I'm just going to be a dick and say, like, if you're not qualified, you're not
Yeah.
called.
Right.
And that is a thing that in Christian circles and in spiritual circles, they've decided, like, is the opposite. Like,
Yeah.
God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And I call bullshit on that.
Yeah.
Like, your calling is like what you are qualified to do. That's what you're called to do.
Yes.
And the qualification could be any number of things. It could be a natural propensity. It could just be a thing that you're born with, but you better be able to point it out and show me why you're the one to do this thing.
Yes.
Or I'm going to say no. Just like if you came to my door and said, I feel called to be a pediatrician, I would not say, well, if God says,
great, I'll operate on my child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we just, those are not standards by which we live in any other part of our society. And so to apply it to the people who are serving the most vulnerable people groups is absolute trash.
Yeah. Well, and I think in addition to, are you qualified? Another question that like really convicted me is, am I needed? Like does another country need me to go and do work that those people could be paid to do, right?
Right.
And I think one of the biggest lessons for that for me was I wasn't a missionary, but I was leading short-term trips at my church. That was my job, is I was putting together these short-term trips, 2-week trips where everybody asked everyone for money. And then we would take a team of 20 to the tune of $40,000 of raised money.
In t-shirts.
In matching t-shirts. And we would go and we would build things. And then it's just, as I really started thinking about it, like, if we had taken all that money for the flights and the hotels we stayed at, and we had sent that money there, we could have employed people. We could have, the money could have been much better spent, and I think, but it's like, we weren't thinking that through because we all wanted to go to Africa and feel good about ourselves and feel like we were in. So, to me, it's now at this point, if I do mission work, I think, what am I uniquely qualified to do so that I'm not taking a job from someone else? So for me, that would be like, can I apply my psych degree in some way? Or because I have a blog, am I going to be using a platform in some way, but not just like, I'm going to go down and take a paintbrush out of someone else's hand that is qualified to do that job because I want to go on a trip.
Sure, exactly. And I totally agree. And in fact, I would take it a step further and I would say I would not do anything called missions work. I would not do anything with a vague, nebulous name. I would not do anything that is skilled work that they're actually taking volunteers to do, because volunteers are not skilled workers.
Yeah.
I would not do anything under the name of missions, because mission doesn't mean anything. It means nothing. I would not do anything that doesn't have a very distinct qualification, like, this is what we're going to do, so these are the people who we need. And then I would do a whole lot of research to see if even that was necessary, because when people say they're going on mission trips or they're going on these service trips or whatever, they first want to do it because they want to serve, but oftentimes that is in fact stealing jobs and hurting families and emasculating providers and all kinds of things. And secondly, we say, but I want to love people for Jesus. I want to be the hands and feet of Jesus. And I would challenge anybody who's going on a mission trip to be the hands and feet of Jesus to Google that country and then Google seminaries in that country.
Yes.
And then Google churches in that country. You will not find a country. I'm sure there's countries without seminaries, but like, there are educated theologians and for sure in your denomination,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that may be, in every country.
Right.
Like there are people there who are qualified, who understand the culture, who understand the history, who understand the nuances
Who speak the
that are leading the
language.
church there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
crucial. The language.
Yeah.
And so to believe that like God wants to use North Americans specifically to go into other countries where there are actual like citizens who are
Yeah.
already doing these things is it's just absurd to me.
I remember once you wrote about the sandwich analogy. Do you remember that one? Where
Oh
it was
yeah. Mm-hmm.
talk about that one because I thought it was
Gosh, that
so
was ages
good.
ago.
I know, and it
Um,
stuck with me.
that's right. I did a thing where I was just like, imagine for a minute that you are like a middle class American living your life on your suburban street. And all of a sudden, like a group of wealthy elite people like fly into your neighborhood. They land in a helicopter on your street and they're like, taking pictures and looking around and they're amazed. Like, this is how the middle class lives. You guys, these houses are so cute. They're like 2,200 square feet. They're adorable. Can you believe this? And they're saying how like inspired they are by your happiness at your tiny tiny
You're happy
McMansion.
in spite of
Yes,
this.
and they are taking photos with your children and giving your kids candy and talking to them in like these weird intimate ways and telling them that they love them. And then as part of their trip into your suburban middle class neighborhood, you are going to teach them how to make a sandwich because they don't do that in their culture.
Mm-hmm.
So you bring them into your kitchen and you show them how to, yeah, I don't know, put mayonnaise on bread and slap some turkey on there. I don't know. You show them how to make a sandwich and they're like, amazing. And they're so just like grateful that you've shown them this skill. And you feel really uncomfortable about all of this, but also they're going to give everybody's house a fresh coat of paint. Like they're paying for it. They're going to make sure it gets done. And your house kind of needs a new coat of paint. So you're like, oh, I want what they're giving me.
Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable by this whole scenario. But sure, if all I have to do is show them how to make a sandwich and they're going to take some pictures with my family, I guess that's worth it. I guess. And then this happens and then they all get in their helicopter and they fly back to their rich people palace in the mountains or wherever rich people live. And they do a slideshow about how they came to the suburbs and they took pictures with children who wear hand-me-downs and learned how to make a sandwich. And everyone goes like, oh my gosh,
Well,
how
and
good of you to serve.
don't forget, they also take a selfie with your child that becomes their Facebook profile.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. And people congratulate them. People
Yeah.
tell them how awesome they are for having done this thing. And then they go back and they tell people like how much they learned and how challenged they were and how grateful they are now to have all that they have
Yeah.
because they don't have to live like us in the suburbs.
Yeah.
And yet every day we do this all
We
around the
do.
world to
Yes,
people
we do.
who are poorer than us.
Yeah, we do. And it can be, it, you know, and, I don't think people are going in and doing these things with ill intent.
Mm-mm.
But it's really important to make the note between intent and effect. And
Mm-hmm.
the effect is often demoralization. It can also be like unhealthy dependence.
Dependency. Yep.
And it can also be, as you said, that their actual feelings aren't being shared because you have something they want.
It's mutually exploitative for
Yes,
sure.
it
And
is.
anybody who pretends like it's not is absolutely delusional.
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember one of those like gut check moments for me. Our church had been involved in missions to India, and we had built an orphanage. And I really cared about orphans, and I felt great that we had built this orphanage. I was just like, this is where my heart is. We've raised all this money. We've built an orphanage, and these kids have a place to live. And we went and visited, and first of all, the kids were sleeping. Um, they were all sleeping on the floor, probably 100 kids in a big giant room,
Mm-hmm.
mixed gender. And I'm a therapist, and I'm like, that's not good.
Right.
That's not good at all. I know where that leads when you have a bunch of kids coming from different
Traumatized
places,
kids. Mm-hmm.
traumatized kids, any kids, honestly. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
not a good
Yeah.
idea. There's a reason when we send our children to camp that they're in supervised dorms, right? We wouldn't send our own kids. And that's the thing too. If you walk into an orphanage and think, would I let my kid come stay here for a week? If the answer is no, then you're not doing it right. But so, there's all these kids, and then we begin meeting them and realizing they all have living parents
Mm-hmm.
that they go visit on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we've built is not an orphanage,
It's
it's
a
a
boarding
boarding
school.
school.
Yeah. A
And
shitty
we've
one.
a very poorly supervised boarding school
Uh-huh.
for not orphans. This is not an orphanage. And so what we've effectively done is we've taken these kids away from their families during the week, and we're, just like cramming them all in and then patting ourselves on the back that we built an orphanage. These are not
Mm-hmm.
orphans. And the money that we have spent to house and clothe and feed these kids and, have the nannies there to supervise.
And also fly to visit them because you love them so
Yes, oh,
much.
of course, because we flew and visited them to love on the orphans.
Yeah.
These kids should be in their homes, and we should
Yep.
be spending every single penny on resourcing the families.
Yep.
And I just think there's some weird thing where we want to care for orphans, but we don't want to care for families. And if we care for families, we can prevent a lot of the orphans,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
There are statistically very few true orphans.
Yes. And
And I
there
mean,
are
even
some.
of course,
But
but even kids, even orphans usually have grandparents or
yeah,
aunts and uncles. Like, there's usually a family member, and we know psychologically that it is always better,
yeah,
almost, for a kid to be with a family member or an
yeah,
extended family member if their parents are gone or whatever. And so, yeah, we have created this terrible scenario.
yeah,
And then one church does it and they talk about it, and then their neighbor church is like, oh my gosh, that's such a good idea, we're going to do that, we're going to go do
hmm
that in Honduras. And then
yeah,
another church hears and they go and they do it in Guatemala, and it just becomes, we have done this all around the world, is
we
created these
have.
fake orphanages, and
Yes. Fake
it's not
orphanages with church names on the front that get, passed around in photos. Here's where your money's going. Here's what we've done.
good. Hmm.
When in reality, like I mean, an orphanage, I have strong feelings on orphanages. I have a child who lived in one for 3 years. An orphanage is a triage situation. It should not be,
Home,
it should not be home. A kid should come into an
right?
orphanage,
It's not home.
and then that we should be figuring out, can we put them back in their birth family, can we reunite them with someone, and if that's absolutely impossible, then can they be adopted or fostered out in the community with
Mhm.
a family in a home. But we've just in the name of missions just really created a system where um, orphanages are just a way for us to house poor children and care for them instead of caring for their family.
Right.
And it's
Right.
really sad.
It's really sad, but that's how, like, the whole God calling is so dangerous,
Yeah.
because in Christian circles, if you say God called you, nobody wants to say no, he didn't.
Yeah.
But at some point we have to give each other permission to say, actually, I think maybe that's, maybe you don't belong there, or
Yeah.
maybe you aren't equipped to do that, or maybe that's not a good thing to do, and here's why.
Hmm.
And but we've created this whole like dictionary of nebulous words, spiritual language that we use to do whatever we want, anywhere we want in the world, and have other
Well,
people pay.
and it is really hard. And I want to give empathy to the people who are maybe even listening to this and going like, "Ooh, this," like they're touching on something I'm doing,
Mhm.
because I've done those things before, and it
So
is
have I, yeah.
very hard to be told, this thing that you have spent a lot of money on, a lot of time on, and that has become a part of your identity, like a way that you see yourself as being good, and and being a part of social justice, and a Christian, like, and a calling, that maybe this thing that you've been doing is harming, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to say to someone. It's very difficult to say that, to
Yep.
say, hey, this orphanage you've built is probably hurting kids.
Mhm.
That's a really hard thing to say to people.
Right. And these are not bad people. I wasn't a
No,
bad
right.
person when I became, I
No.
wasn't doing something bad, or,
Yeah.
intentionally. And the people that love orphans and I mean, there are all kinds of motivations. And I do think that people are more complicated than just like, it's, there are other reasons I think that people do go into missions, and short-term or long-term, that include selfish reasons as well.
Yeah.
But most people just want to do something good, or
Yeah.
they want to make sacrifices, they want to help people, they want to serve, they want to love,
Hmm.
but they have been indoctrinated into a system that is not healthy.
Yeah.
And so like trying to say like it's not you, it's the system. um, some people can receive that and some people cannot,
Yeah.
or will not.
Yeah.
So
It's
it is
hard.
what yeah, it is. It's hard, but we've come so far in this conversation since I mean, I left Costa Rica in 2012,
Hmm.
and this was still like a new kind of, we were really just starting to talk about like white saviorism and orphanage or
Hmm.
orphan care and keeping families together and looking at alternatives and kind of like holding back our 19-year-old girls and saying like, please don't do that. Like, please don't get on a plane and move to another country and adopt 7 kids. Like, we know you've heard it worked out for someone, but it's not ideal.
Yeah.
And
No, it's not.
the conversation has evolved really quickly, I think. So
Yeah.
that's positive. Like, people do want to find better ways of serving and helping, but it can get messy pretty fast.
Yeah. It can. It can be. But yes, I agree. People are, I think the conversation's shifting. I think your book was a big help. I mean, I think, I think your book really helped a lot of people, kind of move in their understanding of this.
I hope
Um,
so. I mean,
yeah.
I do get lovely messages from people very often that are just like, oh my gosh, like, actually, I get more messages from people saying like, I was thinking the same things.
Yeah.
Like, tons of people become missionaries or go on a mission, and then they're like, and it just feels squicky. It's like
Oh,
something's
yeah.
not right, and I don't
Yeah.
get it. And so I get a lot of messages from people that are like, oh my gosh, like, you get it, or like, I'm on the same page. But a lot of other people too who are just like, that was challenging and hard to hear, but it's very personal for me. Like, I wrote a memoir. I did not write a scathing
Right.
like everyone else sucks, and like, I did this. I
Yeah.
sold everything and moved my
Yep.
family from the suburbs to another country to dive
Totally.
headlong into this lifestyle, and had to really kind of like figure out how to extract
Yeah.
my family without burning every bridge, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
And it was, I mean, that's what I loved about your book. It was a memoir. I mean, you talked through, your upbringing and, it wasn't just like, here's a scathing critique of the mission field. It was really your own personal story,
Hmm.
which I
Yeah.
loved.
Which included and wasn't very much formed by like going into the mission field and being like,
Yeah.
oh wait, I I have opinions and also a voice. I'm going to use them both,
Yes.
which was for me in my 30s, like the first time that I'd
Yeah.
really, as a wife, very young mom
Hmm.
and wife from the time I was 18, like I had not discovered my own capacity to like
Yeah.
think and speak. And so
Yes.
it was a process. And I'm
Yeah.
grateful that missions was a part of that for me. But
Yeah. Well, we share something else in common. I mean, it's funny, our lives have been very parallel in many ways. I mean, we both married
mm-hmm,
very young. We both were involved in missions peripherally, and then
mm-hmm.
for you directly. We both wrote a blog, and then we both went through a divorce at nearly the same time.
You bet we did.
I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
I actually remember sitting with you in the Austin airport. And I think both of us were at the point where we were both ready to say, like, I think that my marriage has to end. Like we were
Uh-huh.
both right at
Mm-hmm.
that tipping point.
Yeah.
And it was so scary
Yeah.
to say it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it it was very encouraging to me that you were going through it at the same time or that similar
Yeah.
time. And it gave me courage because it was just like, I don't know how to do this and I don't know what comes next. And, we both stayed in very long, like very unhealthy, very long marriages and
Hmm.
did everything we possibly could
We did.
and then some, I think. And, so it for someone who had worked so hard for so long to stay married it did feel like, oh, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Like, have I, I got my divorce papers the month after my 25th wedding anniversary. 25 years.
I got mine the month of my 20th. Isn't that weird? Just like
It's so
the
weird.
round number, like just the full
Yes.
circle.
It's just like, wow, a quarter of a century I spent
Yeah.
doing this thing,
Yeah.
and that thing, and it failed
Yeah.
ultimately. But yeah, like walking through that process and being in the kind of like semi-public,
Yeah.
the blogging and having an online kind of an audience for your public dismantling of your marriage it's a weird thing. And so to be that in that with you at the same time was kind of like, oh my gosh, like how do we do this? And yeah,
I know.
yeah, it was.
I remember you posted publicly about your divorce before I did. And but I was divorced and I just
Mhm.
hadn't said it online. And I remember when you put your post out there, it was kind of like she survived it. Like she did it. She survived
Uh-huh.
it. She's getting
Uh-huh.
mostly support, you know? It
Mm-hmm.
was
So
like,
yeah,
I think I can do this.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
it
but y
was.
yeah, as you said, I mean, we were both married a very long time and we both
Mhm.
worked, and neither of us wanted to be divorced. I mean,
No, I'm
I
a
don't
big
know
fan of
that
marriage.
anybody does. Yeah. Um,
Mhm.
but we both
And at the
worked,
same time, I want to say
yeah,
it's the best decision I've ever made.
for sure. Me too. For
So
sure.
I am super pro marriage.
Yes, I
I
am
am
too.
personally monogamous, and like
Yep.
it's a thing that I valued very much.
Yep.
And at this and divorce was absolutely the best option for me,
Yeah.
and I should have done it a long time ago. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I should have, but whatever.
Yeah.
Like, so it is a weird thing to walk through publicly and just be like, well, here I'm getting divorced, and then people are like, why would you give up? And you're like, okay, okay, dum dum.
Well, I think one of the things you and I also have in common is that we were both public people who seemed very vulnerable, who were very quiet about our marriage issues.
Uh-huh.
You know, I
Very.
mean,
Yep.
both. And even,
Mhm.
you were kind of at that precipice even in the writing of your last book,
Absolutely.
and
I
you
had
were
to.
still so very quiet, you know.
Uh-huh. In fact, my publisher, there's a chapter on marriage in my book, or on my marriage, and um, I had originally written it knowing that I was eventually going to get a divorce. Like I'd
Yeah.
known for a long time. It was really a matter of timing,
Yeah.
and they had me go back and kind of rewrite, like kind of soften it,
Yeah.
because it was such a big question written out. Like I left like a real big hole
Yeah.
to fill later, like to be like, well, see, guys, I prepared you for this,
Yeah.
but it really did kind of like it sort of messed with the. It was weird for readers. It was weird. Like
Yeah.
it would have been weird to just be like, but what happened with our marriage? And so, and then the book ends. And so it was the right call, like in a literary sense. Like
Yes.
it was the right call for the book, but I have
Yes.
regrets because I'm just like I knew, and it reads it's not a good look. But it is weird because you and I talked about the whole thing with divorce, and you're the one that told me like we kind of both we lamented a lot, like how do we kind of share this publicly, and we both sort of started like like the eliminating photo evidence of our exes and kind of like
Totally.
slowly like just changing the narrative. And it was a weird thing because we are both authentic people. Like,
Yes.
we
We're
both
authentic.
value,
Yeah.
yeah, we value honesty and we value truth,
Hmm.
and we challenge and we question. That's what we are about. And you and I were talking about this once, and you said,
Hmm.
there's a real big difference between um, secrecy and privacy.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, like, yeah, that's so true. Because
Yeah.
I'm not a secretive person, and my divorce was not a secret. I wasn't
Right.
ashamed of it, but it's private. It was a private
Yes.
matter between
Yeah.
myself and this other person whose story I
Yes.
don't get to tell.
No.
And so it was just, yeah,
Yeah.
that was really crucial for me.
And I think too, it's like for me, it was like my close friends knew everything that was going on. You know,
Mhm.
it wasn't a secret, as you said. Like my close friends, you know all of the details of my divorce. I know all of the dirty details of yours, but that's not for like the general audience. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like that's
Yep.
not for someone who has read my blog, but I've never met in person. And so
Right.
finding those layers of disclosure and just making sure that, I've always felt like I want to make sure that, I have kind of determined like who are the people that know, and then who are the people that they don't maybe need to know all of the details. Like, can I be authentic without, as you said, I mean, there's a whole other party involved and kids who probably don't want to read
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
details of that parent online, which is
Right.
not fair either. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Right. It really is. And it was I mean, but it was a process, and even kind of getting to that place where it's like I love I loved blogging, and that was a really fun, like, useful, productive period in my life. It was very formative for me, but we don't owe readers anything.
No.
Like it's cool, and I'm happy to share the things that I do share, but there are things that happen in the course of a marriage that are, or an ending a marriage, that are
Yeah,
painful, traumatic, that need
totally.
therapy, that need
Yes.
like you need to process. And so
Yes.
to say, like, I'm not going to give all that to everybody
Yeah.
felt really easy for me. I was just like, yeah, I don't,
Yeah.
we don't owe the world our dirty secrets.
No. And I mean, I even like, I always tried to stay authentic. So it's like, my marriage was really struggling, I stopped posting photos. But by the
Mhm.
time I made the announcement, it was really funny because most people were like, yeah, we know.
Uh-huh.
Like, obviously,
Yeah,
we haven't seen your husband on your Facebook for 2 years, 3 years, you know?
right. And I thought I'd done a good job of that, but I had been separated for quite a while, um, and my ex would not tell anyone. He would not tell anyone
It's
that we
so
were
funny.
separated. And I mean, we were not living in the same home. We
Yeah.
were 100% getting a divorce. I mean, it was, and nobody knew. So, like, in the town where he was a pastor at one point, and where we lived and raised our kids, and like,
Yeah.
I was constantly running into people. And I'll tell you this, I mean, this is a lot of information, but eventually, sadly, one of my kids passed away. And at his memorial, like at his thing, a ton of people did not know that I was divorced. And I
Oh,
was there
wow.
with my new guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, he had a new chick, and she was there too. So we are like
That's so
completely
uncomfortable.
done. And
Yeah.
people who'd known us for ages, who are coming to comfort this couple,
Yeah.
are just like, what the hell
Who are
is
these
going
people?
on? They had no idea. Mhm. It was, I mean, I've run into some people, and they were like, that was awkward. I was like,
Totally.
I'm sorry, I didn't know. And I had already announced it. Like, if they, I was like, well, you should read my blog, because then
It's
you'd
so
know. But
funny.
it was so awkward.
There's so many awkward parts of divorce. There was a season where, because Mark and I are still very friendly, and so if we go to a school function, we'll sit together, and then my boyfriend
Mhm.
will come, and so the three of us will be sitting together. And unbeknownst to me, there was a rumor going around the school that I was poly
Oh, okay.
because they thought I
Just,
was still married to Mark, and I had a
uh-huh.
boyfriend, which I'm like, well, I mean, I appreciate you guys thinking I'm that edgy. I don't have the time for that, but
Well, I will say this, divorce takes a while. There was a minute when I was not technically divorced,
yes.
but definitely moved on.
Yes, yes.
And I don't care. I mean, that's just how things work. But like, it
Well,
is
divorce in
so,
California is one of the longest
oh,
states to get a divorce in. There's weird required waiting periods,
mhm.
and it drags. It drags for a very long time.
It really does. It took a while. It took a couple of years, actually,
Yeah,
for them to
yeah,
be.
that is the case for almost everyone I know. So that's
Mhm.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
But
gosh.
we walked through it. I mean, and people always, want my advice on divorce. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone because it's pretty terrible
Hmm. Yep.
unless you are living with someone that you feel like it's more toxic to stay, in which case,
Hmm.
you
Right.
know.
And I just feel like there are really, really good reasons for divorce.
Yeah.
And especially in the church, we're really good at ignoring them, and like
Yes.
patting them on the head and saying, like, it's
Yes.
not that bad. And,
Yeah.
um, and again, it's the same stuff, is like, God called me, when you're in that kind of evangelical circle,
Hmm.
and people are telling you, first of all, that like you're garbage because
Yeah.
you were born, right? Like you're
Yes.
just this
You're a
fallen.
wretch. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And also on top of that, you're a woman. So you're like
Mm-hmm.
like you're the Eve, and also you don't deserve love. And you're so lucky that God loves you. Like
Yes.
God's so great that he would love even you,
Mm-hmm.
you sack of shit.
With all you've
And then,
done.
right. So you're like this message that like, I'm so lucky to be loved by anyone, by anything, because I
Yeah.
don't deserve love because I'm just this
Totally.
fallen creature. And then on top of that, like we get the how many times does Jesus say to forgive?
Mm-hmm.
7 times 70? Oh, but it's not an actual number. It just means like infinity. Like you
Yeah.
just keep forgiving. And it doesn't matter what it costs you, because like we're supposed to be like Jesus, and Jesus dies for what we do to him.
Yeah.
So it's just such a mess
It is.
for people who are like really suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I'll just say this. If you are watching this and you are like red flags everywhere and you
Mm-hmm.
really think you should have left already, get out.
Well, this is what I would say. If your marriage is so bad that you can't talk to your close friends about how bad it is without
Oh my
feeling like they'll
gosh.
hate your husband,
Yeah.
that I think that you and I were both in that.
Yep.
And we were very good friends even with each other, and we were hiding reality of our marriages just because I didn't want my closest friends to hate my husband. And
Yep.
I knew they would if I told them the
Mm-hmm.
truth, and
Mm-hmm.
did.
Uh-huh.
But if you are
Yep.
living in that would be my biggest piece of advice is be real with your inner circle about your whole marriage, all of
That is
it.
super, super good advice. I
Yeah.
mean, that is absolutely the truth. Is the things that we both protected, like the secrets that we kept, and
Mm-hmm.
the ways that we protected our the reputation
Yep.
of our
Yep.
ex-spouse and our marriage over our own health and well-being.
Yes.
I mean, that is so smart. Like
Yeah.
that was a crucial turning point for me, was like, I'm going to tell you guys some things
Mm-hmm.
and you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
And you
But
guys,
I
my girlfriends
think
were just like, oh my gosh.
But don't you feel like when you said those things out loud and
Mm-hmm.
you heard them say things you knew, but you heard it from the perspective of what this must sound like to your friends who love you. Don't you feel
Mm-hmm.
like that was a critical moment of, oh, this is so bad? Like
Yeah.
when I hear myself speak this out loud, this is so bad. It's no longer just me rattling around in my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's, we're so good at kind of like creating these fake puzzles and fitting little pieces in our own lives. And when you try and show that to someone else, when you're like, look what I've
Yeah.
made, look at this pretty picture. And you show them the whole thing and they're like, this doesn't work. This
Yeah.
isn't working.
Right.
Your friends can say that to you and you're
Yes.
just like, and then you see it and you're like, oh
Yeah.
gosh, yeah, I'm really working hard to hold this thing together that doesn't belong.
Totally.
And yeah, so yeah, it was huge, was saying it out loud. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really good parameter. Honestly, you should write a book about that.
Well, we'll close with this. You and I were joking when we first hopped on before I was recording just how much you and I both sort of
Hate book writing.
hated writing our books.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I know that there are people, we have friends that
they're
just love,
prolific,
they're prolific and they just get excited and they're like, man, I can't wait to sit down and write. And I know you and I were both just like, ugh.
right? Why did I agree to do this?
Yeah.
Why? So
Yeah.
many times I was like, I'm gonna write a check and give the money back.
Yeah.
I don't want to finish.
Me too.
I'm done.
But then you wrote a really good book. I mean, I think it's just
It's
we both have a lot of self-doubt and, insecurity and
ridiculous, but I love your book, and I know
well, I love
I'm so
yours.
excited for it to really get out into the world because it's going to help so many people.
Well, thank you.
Like,
I
and it's
appreciate that.
funny. It's like, it's so funny. It like makes me laugh out loud, like literally chuckle when it's so funny.
Well, Jamie, I mean, I told you this when I was writing it, but I want to say it again. The whole time I was writing it, the whole time I was like, if I can just match what Jamie did. Like I thought that the whole time. I was like, I want to be real the way that she was real. I want to share discoveries the way she shared discoveries. I want to be funny and talking about hard things the way she did that. Like, I truly feel like your book was just like my goalpost. I
Oh
really
my
do.
gosh. You should have raised the bar. You could have written a much better book. And now I see it. Now your book could have been so much
Shut
better.
up.
Oh, okay. Well,
Shut up.
congratulations, you did it. And I'm very excited for it to
Thanks.
get out there into the world.
Thank you, friend. Well, it was so good to talk to you and see your face.
Same.
All right.
Okay.